The first time a woman in a tailored gray suit told me she was going to take 3/4 of my land, she did it with a smile, so polite it almost felt like a courtesy, like she was offering me dessert instead of a threat. She stood on my porch, sunlight glinting off her sunglasses, and said, "We'll see who has the right," as if property law were a cute little debate club. I remember thinking, wow, this is how it starts, doesn't it? Not with bulldozers, but with a clipboard. My name's Aiden Sloan. I'm 39, a biologist by trade, and I inherited nearly 300 acres of forest from my grandfather, along with the old two-story house he built with his own hands before World War II. The house creaks when the temperature shifts, the porch leans a hair to the left, and the roof's been patched so many times it looks like a quilt. But solid, honest, the kind of place that doesn't pretend to be anything it's not. The land, though, that's the real inheritance. Oaks older than any zoning committee. Soft trails worn by deer, not developers. Rare wildflowers tucked into quiet corners like secrets. When my grandfather left it to me, I went through every deed, every survey, every brittle county map. I made sure of one thing. We were outside any HOA jurisdiction. Clean, separate, untouchable. Next door, over the last decade, a development had grown like a manicured fungus. Maple Ridge, pastel houses, identical mailboxes, lawns trimmed to military precision. I didn't judge them. That was their world. Mine was moss and soil samples and bird calls at dawn. We coexisted fine for years, polite waves, distant nods, until Alice Strange showed up. She came one bright morning with 2 suited men and a young woman clutching a clipboard like it was a weapon. Alice introduced herself as president of the Maple Ridge HOA. Her voice was smooth, controlled. She handed me a glossy folder and explained, without so much as a warm-up sentence, that Maple Ridge needed a direct corridor to the highway. And the most logical path, she said, cut straight through my forest. 50 meters wide. A clean slice from the edge of their development to the road, skimming right up toward my house. They were offering me $5,000. I actually laughed. I couldn't help it. $5,000 wouldn't cover the ecological survey alone, let alone the destruction. I told her it wasn't for sale. Not for $5,000. Not for 50. Not for anything. That's when she tilted her head and gave me that smile. "We'll see," she said softly. "You ever feel a storm coming before the sky changes?" That's what it felt like. A few days later, bright orange signs appeared near my gate. Temporary access restriction. Authorized personnel only. With the Maple Ridge logo stamped neatly at the bottom. On my land. I ripped them out of the ground, so hard dirt sprayed across my boots. Then came the drone, hovering just above my tree lean, lazy circles like a vulture pretending to admire the view. Why call the police? They were sympathetic, but cautious. HOAs, apparently, have a way of sounding official enough to blur the lines. Then the letters started. Noise violations, waste disposal complaints, unauthorized land use, fabricated nonsense, each typed in stiff legal language, each designed to look serious. It wasn't about truth. It was about pressure, about making me tired. That was the moment I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a campaign. So I called my lawyer, and then I hired a private investigator. If they wanted to play organized, I could play organized. Within a week, the investigator uncovered emails between HOA board members discussing strategies to wear me down. They'd already signed preliminary agreements with contractors, told them the deal was essentially done. They had altered property maps, shading in my land as Phase 4 expansion. Phase 4. My grandfather's forest labeled like a shopping center. I remember staring at those doctored maps late at night, moonlight spilling across my desk. That was the twist for me. I thought this was arrogance. It was fraud. Calculated. Intentional. They were betting I wouldn't fight hard enough. They underestimated how stubborn a man can get when you threaten his roots. I set up motion cameras along the boundary. I documented every drone flyover, every unauthorized marker. One clip caught surveyors unloading equipment right over my property line, laughing like it was already theirs. Meanwhile, I called one of the major contractors directly, told them they were being misled. You could hear the panic shift in his voice mid-conversation. Within 48 hours, crews were pulled. Legal teams were circling, but not around me. The pressure was starting to flip. We filed multiple lawsuits at once: trespass, harassment, attempted property fraud, privacy violations. A legal shotgun blast. I personally delivered certified notices to the HOA office with a police officer standing beside me. The receptionist's hands trembled when she saw the envelope. That afternoon, Alice held a community meeting and told her residents everything was under control. But cracks were forming. The police began investigating the drones. Turns out some weren't even registered properly. Contractors demanded releases from their agreements. A few Maple Ridge homeowners quietly left notes at my gate, apologizing. Still, the stress was brutal. I barely slept. Every snapping twig outside jolted me awake. This wasn't just paperwork. It was my home. The court date came heavy and gray. I wore the only blazer I owned. Figured I should look slightly less like a woodland hermit. Alice sat across from me, immaculate as ever, flanked by board members and a tight-lipped attorney. My lawyer, Ben, laid it out clean and devastating. Surveillance footage, emails, contractor statements. Then he unveiled the side-by-side maps, the real ones and the alter versions. Even the judge leaned forward. Alice's attorney tried to call it a misunderstanding. That's when Alice snapped. "It's not forgery," she said sharply. "It's clarification. You should be part of our association." The courtroom went silent. And in that silence, you could feel it. The shift, the unraveling. The judge didn't look amused. By the time the ruling came down, my head felt light. The court found in my favor on every count, declared the HOA's actions unlawful, invalidated their contracts, hit them with over $400,000 in damages, recommended internal investigation of the board. Alice didn't look at me when we stood to leave. Outside the courthouse, reporters clustered. Headlines spread fast. Maple Ridge residents, who'd once nodded at Alice like she was royalty, were suddenly furious about wasted fees and reckless overreach. Within a week, she resigned. Contractors filed breach claims against the HOA. City officials opened permit reviews. The polished suburban facade cracked wide open. And me? I went home. I built a solid fence along the boundary. Installed cameras, clear signs, private property. No trespassing. Violators prosecuted. It wasn't about paranoia. It was about clarity. Some Maple Ridge residents came by afterward. One elderly man handed me a bottle of whiskey and said, "You did what the rest of us were too scared to do." That stuck with me. Because here's the thing I realized. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it smiles. It calls coercion community. It calls theft development. And it counts on you being too polite, too tired, too intimidated to say no. If I'd folded, if I'd thought, maybe this is inevitable, they would have paved straight through history. Weeks turned into months. The forest settled back into itself. I went back to tracking wildlife, drafting a paper on an endangered wildflower that blooms stubbornly in a shaded corner of the land. The house felt like home again instead of a bunker. One evening, I sat on the porch with a glass of whiskey, sun bleeding gold through the trees. The air smelled like pine and cool earth. The fence stood firm at the edge of my vision. This land had survived storms, droughts, time, and a woman with a clipboard who thought legacy could be negotiated. I raised my glass toward the darkening woods. "Let them try again," I muttered. Because here's the lesson I didn't expect to learn. Sometimes protecting peace requires conflict. Sometimes the only reason justice exists is because someone refuses to step aside. Not out of ego, not out of greed, but because some things are not for sale. And yet karma showed up. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just steady, legal, final. Alice moved away. Maple Ridge elected new leadership. The corridor? Dead on arrival. The forest is still here, breathing, waiting, uncut. So let me ask you something. When community progress starts trampling individual rights, where's the line? At what point does compromise become surrender? I know where mine is. What about yours? Tell me, would you have fought, or would you have taken the 5,000 and walked away? Drop your thoughts below. I genuinely want to hear your take, because one day, it might be your porch someone's standing on with a polite smile and a folder full of plans.